Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of V Next. I am your host, Mike Walker, and today we are going to talk about innovation in higher education. As you know, we're in the middle of the fall season, and this is on top of folks' minds. The world we live in with a global pandemic and all the challenges that are introduced and some of the opportunities that present themselves. And so, who better to talk to than Scott Allen? He is a professor at Carroll University, and we're going to dive into some of the challenges that universities face when it comes to innovation and staying on top of where the world is heading. And so we're going to talk about the challenges. We're going to talk about some of the key best practices. We're going to introduce all sorts of anecdotes about our backgrounds and just all sorts of good stuff. So definitely stay tuned for that. Now, like always, all the show notes and links will be provided on vnextpod.com. That's vnextpod.com. And also remember to like and subscribe. If you're like me, I've got so much stuff going on that I oftentimes forget to check, when my latest podcasts are available. And so by doing this, you always stay up to date and you get the friendly reminders. So, with that, let's get into it. Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, sir. How you doing today?
I am doing fantastic, and I
Good.
really appreciate you taking the time today to talk with us.
Oh, of course, of course. It's an honor to be here, Mike, and I'm looking forward to the conversation for sure.
Yeah, it should be a really cool one because we're going to get into a topic that I'm sure that many parents and young professionals are thinking quite a bit about today,
Yeah,
given the season that we're in, which is higher education and innovation around this whole space of higher ed.
yeah.
And so, you and I, we've known each other for a little while, but others might not know anything about you. And so, it'd be great in your own words for you to
Yeah,
kind of tell us, who you are, what are you up to?
yeah. So, so my name is Scott Allen, and I teach in the College of Business at John Carroll University. And when I introduce myself, I often talk about kind of five things that I have going on. So, I'm a parent. My wife and I have twin girls. They're 10, and then our son is 12, so fifth and seventh grade. So family, and we have all kinds of hobbies as a family, but we love the national parks. So actually today I have my Timberline Lodge. Actually, that's not a national park, but do you know where the Timberline Lodge is?
No, I
Do you know,
don't.
Mike Walker? Oregon. It's where they filmed the outside scenes of The Shining. So it's this beautiful lodge at Mount Hood. So we love getting on little adventures like that. So family.
Yeah.
Then I teach in the College of Business at John Carroll. I teach a lot of our courses in leadership and management skills and then executive communication. I do some consulting work. So I spend a lot of time with organizations talking about leadership, talking about technologies enabling disruption, executive communication. And if what I'm saying out there in the world, so to speak, is connecting, then I know what's coming back to the classroom is connecting. And so I love doing that type of work. And then I love being in the classroom. I have class tonight from 6:30 to probably 8:30 tonight, and that's not work. It's kind of this silly thing I have. I feel like what's the word I'm looking for? It's a con somehow that I'm getting paid to do this work, right?
Yeah.
And then I dabble a little bit in entrepreneurship, and so co-founded a nonprofit, which is actually a leadership competition, and then also just began a startup, kind of a tech startup, where imagine if we were to perform the analytics on every aspect of the conversation we just had. So if we're trying to train one another on presentation skills, however many times I say in the next 30 to 45 minutes, it'll be captured for eternity. And so we're introducing that, beta testing that this fall, and it's been a lot of fun. I've been learning a lot. So love, and then I write. right? So that might be 6. So a lot of different things, but that's what I love about my job is that it kind of provides me a space where I can explore all kinds of different little nooks and crannies. So this topic today, higher ed and kind of high tech technologies enabling disruption, innovation in higher ed, I love that conversation because I think it's a fascinating one for sure.
No, it is, and you are probably much busier than I am based on what all the
No,
things that you're
no,
engaged in. It's you're a busy guy, and I really like your latest venture around. Essentially killing off the filler words, the ums and the
yeah,
ahs and the so's, and all
yeah.
those things that you're taught not to do, but we do.
But now we can count them, right? And we know your pace, and we know any number of other aspects about adding computer vision, and you can get some cool things around eye contact and hand gestures. So I'm learning a lot. My partner's in Minneapolis, and we've known each other since ninth grade. We kind of bonded in homeroom. I was an A, he was a G, so we sat right next to each other in ninth grade,
There you go.
and that's where it all started. So
Yeah, and so we definitely need to have you on to talk in much more depth on that one because I think that a lot of innovators, entrepreneurs, along with really most people in the business world, one, that's a critical skill to have in person. But
yep,
now when we're remote,
yes,
also eye contact is still very important, and it's not very intuitive because as for example, right now, you're
yeah,
probably doing this just like me.
yeah.
I'm not looking at the screen, so I have no idea what I look like, my facial
No,
expression, or
I
you.
desperately want to just look at you.
Yeah, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
looking at a lens. That's what I'm looking at. Now, and also
Yeah.
what I like about what you said about your mug. So I used to live in Seattle, so we would
Oh, nice.
actually vacation down to Oregon
Oh,
to Cannon Beach every year,
oh, yeah. Beautiful.
which is where they filmed part of the Goonies for
Yeah.
those that don't know. And then
Yeah.
the little town of Story up the road is where you can actually visit the house and all that great stuff. But
Oh,
Oregon's a
I didn't
wonderful place.
realize that. I didn't
Yeah.
know the house is there. We spent probably a week and a half in Oregon, and whether it was Bend or Crater Lake or just the wonderful beer, the coffee, the wine in wine country there, the Willamette Valley, we had a wonderful experience. And of course, we were in Seattle for about a week as well. But just trying to help our children kind of see this country and the world.
Yeah.
And I think we're at about 40 states right now. So
Nice.
the pandemic has slowed us down a little bit, but our goal is to get them to all 50 before they're 18. That's the goal. So we're kind of on track.
And most certainly when you're out there, I think the kids will really like this, and it's educational. Definitely visit the Tillamook factory if you haven't
Oh,
been there yet.
oh yeah,
Uh,
we were there.
Okay, so as you know, the biggest payoff is you go through all of it, and at the end, you can have some really good ice cream at the end of this whole venture.
Yeah, Mike Walker, after you eat the grilled cheese and the fries and the mac and cheese and everything with cheese, then you go have ice cream, right? I
Exactly.
did not leave Tillamook feeling great, although it was great. It was a lot of fun. Yeah.
It tasted great, going down, and then about a half hour later, like, oh man, this is bad. Um, so before we go down the whole route of the implications of dairy and digestion, um, you know, another thing that we're all living with right now is, we're kind of in this, semi lockdown pandemic world. And from a higher ed perspective, I'm sure it impacts you in a material way. How
Yeah.
are you dealing with all this?
Yeah. It's interesting, Mike, since I have this really vivid image of the first class I taught after everything shut down. And of course, that was fairly disorienting, right? It was a disorienting experience. So literally, I was kind of up in my bedroom, crouched in a corner with my blinds behind me, with the laptop in my lap, teaching for 50 minutes 3 times a week. And I kind of shudder to think of what those students experienced at that point.
Right.
But I viewed it as an opportunity this whole time to learn. Whether that's switching some of the consulting and presentations that I do, whether that's teaching. Tonight, it's an opportunity to practice for a couple hours. And if I can keep 50 young men and women engaged and kind of with me for a couple hours or for an hour and a half or for an hour, then that's a skill to have, right?
Yeah.
So moving and transitioning to online, I've really enjoyed the challenge, and I see it as such. I mean, obviously, you've sat on any number of different experiences online, the good, the bad, the ugly. And even this morning, my wife and I walk every morning, and we were talking about, okay, what do conferences look like in this new context? A really engaging, great conference where I walk away and I say, that was awesome. No different with class. The first thing I will say to the students tonight is, I hope this is the best class you ever take. That's my goal.
Yeah.
Now, I won't get there with some of you, but that's my objective. That's the mindset I'm walking in with. I want this to be a great learning experience. And then right after that, I say, now give me feedback, because I need it,
Yeah.
because I need to know what's resonating and what isn't resonating. But for me, it's been a learning experience. It's all about learning. So spent a couple $100 at Target, bought a desk, got my books piled what my laptop is sitting on right now, bought a microphone, some soft boxes, and off I went. And I had a lot of nervous energy at the time, so I started a podcast and just really jumped into, how can I learn this medium? Because I don't think it's going anywhere.
Yeah.
And my wife and I kind of have this vision of, 10, 12 years from now. I'm 48 in October. Are we digital? Are we kind of anywhere in the world doing our work? And because we've mastered or practiced this space, we can do that. So maybe we'll live at Cannon Beach, right? 12 years from now. That's the goal. That or maybe.
Or maybe Barbados or Bermuda, as they're trying to entice us to do, right?
Exactly. Right. So for me, it's been a learning experience. It's been actually a lot of fun. It's different. There's things we've lost, but you're speaking at John Carroll this fall, and you're going to be at home when you do so. And we have a gentleman, the global head of innovation for KPMG, speaking at John Carroll this fall. David Sinclair speaking at John Carroll this fall. That wouldn't have happened,
right,
had this not occurred. So what are some of the opportunities that this unfolds as well? And, same what, different how is kind of the mantra that I've kept in my head. We have the same objectives and the same goals, provide a great learning experience. How do we do that in this new environment? So that's, yeah.
Yeah, you're right. And I think that one thing is, we can't throw the proverbial baby out with the bathwater, right? We know that human contact and interaction is an important element.
Yep.
However, I think what this pandemic has done for us, and you're most certainly highlighting that, is it has opened up some of the digital possibilities that we weren't tapping into enough. We really were not maximizing the opportunities that these technologies can open for us. And I would say that we still have a long way to go.
Yep.
And you talk about the user experience, the interaction level, and right now we've tapped into, in a big way, the kind of two-dimensional view of, I'm behind a camera and I'm interacting with you. But what's really exciting, and maybe we'll get into this here in a little bit, is how do you make that interaction even more rich?
Yeah.
If I notice you're in the virtual classroom and you're starting to nod off, can I hook a device up to your seat and just give you a little buzz to say, I see you, I know what's happening here, and I'm going to give you a little jolt of energy. But that aside, we're here to
That
talk.
buzz would be cool in a lot of different aspects of life, right?
Right, right. So
You
my
say
work
the
colleagues
wrong
probably would
thing
not
and you
like
get
that.
a little buzz that was the wrong thing to say.
Right. Yeah, and then we get into all sorts of things like trapdoors, and it gets very Austin Powers very quick. But you know, this is going all along kind of the theme of what we want to talk about today, which is innovation in higher ed. And I was really excited that you agreed to talk to us about, kind of your views on where we're at in on that kind of sliding scale of how innovative or not innovative higher ed is. What are some of your thoughts there?
Yeah. So I have a lot of thoughts, some well informed, some less informed. I'm really intrigued. Have you heard of the work of Joseph Aoun?
Yeah.
He's the president at Northeastern University, right? And some of their work around tech literacy, data literacy, human literacy, really the future of higher ed. What do we need to do to prepare today's students to be successful in the future? And his work, his book Robot Proof, really had a big impact on how I think about, and the fact that he really highlights experiential learning and then lifelong learning. And I
Right.
think both of those are critical pieces of this whole conversation as well. But whether it's how we're structured as institutions of higher education, whether it's the content that we're actually teaching, I think there's a number of opportunities to kind of take our game to the next level. Because as Scott Galloway, he's a professor of marketing at NYU, would suggest, the price has only skyrocketed in the last couple decades, 3 decades. I graduated in 1995 from college. I think I was paying about $7,000 a year all in. That was room and board,
Hmm.
and that was at the University of Minnesota. I imagine that's tripled or quadrupled at this point. And I would be leaving the University of Minnesota with $200,000 in debt because I worked full time, and Uncle Stafford and Mr. Pell Grant helped me kind of make my way. I worked full time through every degree. Still owe Uncle Stafford some money for the PhD. But I think there's a lot of opportunity. I think there's a lot of opportunity to specifically look at some of the curriculum and look at how we're teaching the students, what we're teaching students. And I even think about, I said this to a colleague the other day, what would it look like if our students graduated with certifications in Excel, like from Microsoft, the certifications and next level certifications? What would that look like? And we can put that on the LinkedIn page, and that's a badge everyone's going to recognize and everyone's going to know. Had a partner at PwC last fall in class, and he said, look, if you know Alteryx, how do you say that, Mike? You know the program better than I do. I'm not an accountant. Alteryx?
Yeah, you got it right. Yeah.
Okay. He said, you know what? If you know that program right now and that's on your resume, you are incredibly valuable to PwC or any of the other big four. We don't have a class on that at John Carroll. I suppose we could Google who does have a class on that, and it's probably not a lot of institutions of higher education. You probably have to go other places online to learn some of that content right now, and I think that's a missed opportunity for us. But there's some historical kind of baggage as to how people think about what higher education is. We aren't a trade school. We don't build skills in some corners of thought. So I don't know. I mean, there was a template that was put into place decades, centuries ago, and some of that isn't relevant any longer. In fact, I think some of that's holding us back. I really do. I really believe that.
Do you think that anybody's getting it right in your mind, whether it be here in the United States or other places?
Think about this, and I have to situate myself here. I'm at a school of liberal arts, a university of liberal arts, primarily an institution that is a liberal arts institution, Master's 1, and so we don't grant PhDs. And I'm in a college of business, so I have to situate myself in kind of that. Who's doing it right? Of course, some of your big players have some really cool things. Stanford has some programs around lifelong learning, and I think there's so much opportunity in that. I was at SMU last summer. They're doing courses in Tableau. They're doing courses in Python. I mean, I think that's really interesting. And again, if if I can show that I'm at a certain level of competency, I think that's what organizations want. I mean, you saw this, right? That, well, LinkedIn has moved into learning, of course, but then also places like Apple and Google, Microsoft may be on this list as well. They no longer really care if you have a 4-year degree. They want to know that you can do X.
Yes.
And I don't know that we are graduating students who can always do X. They might have kind of the history of computer science. They might have some level of skill, but are they at the level of certification? I don't know. And so it's fascinating. In our neck of the woods, Tech Elevator, you're familiar with Tech Elevator,
Yep.
right? Yeah. So 3 months coding boot camp. We can go two different paths. 3 months, about $15,000 for tuition. And I believe it's a 93, 94% graduation rate, 93, 94% placement rate. Average starting salary, $60,000. So that's an interesting option. What is it? Is it, Mike, 30% of cybersecurity jobs right now are going unfilled?
Yes.
And what is higher ed doing to enter that space to capitalize and not only help, because you know what? 30% of jobs going unfilled in cybersecurity isn't a good thing for anyone. You provide a good skill set for a great wage looking to the future that's going nowhere. Yet I don't know that we talked yesterday. The listeners may not know that, but we talked yesterday on my podcast, and you'd mentioned a growth mindset. I don't know that along with that growth mindset, which was coined by a woman named Carol Dweck at Stanford, and a very, very simple way of thinking about that is seeing the possibilities and staying open to the possibilities. That whether that's I can someday become a great speaker or someday I can become a great coder, it's I'm not there yet, but I'm open to the possibility that I could get there. And I don't know that in higher ed we're capitalizing on some of those opportunities. We are stuck in that system that was built. By gosh, even if there's zero majors in the degree, it's going to stay. And that system keeps us in some ways stuck. Not everywhere by any means or any stretch of the imagination. But it's a challenge. It's interesting. I mean, it's going to be very interesting to see how COVID-19 impacts institutions of higher education long term. Because as you know, COVID-19 in many ways is accelerating a lot of this transformation that was coming, and now it's accelerated,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, totally. And you bring up some really interesting points. And, I haven't spent a whole lot of time noodling on some of these aspects that you had mentioned. But what it brings up in my mind is I can remember back from my own personal story. You know, I started my professional career when I was 16 years old.
Yep.
Back before the word startup was cool, I worked for a local minority owned incubator
Okay.
and was was coding in C++, was in Power Builder and Visual Basic. I
Yep.
was building at the age of 17 controlled entry systems for prisons
Wow.
using iris recognition biometrics
Yeah.
to log into a computer or to access a controlled area, doing the state of Ohio driver's licenses. We provide all the machines and the code around that. And so by the time that I got to college, it was an experience that was interesting for me because I had already had a taste of, what at the time I would say is the real world.
Yeah.
And, I would have these conversations with my professor. I was taking a C course,
Yeah.
and I just remember vividly. It was in the middle of winter. I'm like, get out of my car. I got to walk a half mile to get to the classroom. I get there, so I'm already kind of a little grumpy because it's after work and this and that. And we had this debate around the code that I had provided,
Mm.
and he was like, "Well, you got this wrong. It really needs to be, I don't know. I think it was 10 lines or 5 lines of code. And I said, well, I wrote it all in 1 line of code. And there was this kind of philosophical debate about it. And I said, well, let's get very real here. um, the more lines of code that I write, that means more maintenance cost it's going to be on the company in which I'm creating this code for. It means
Yeah.
more potential
Yeah.
problems for the company. And so
Yep.
while that 1 line of code may look complex to a novice, that's what best practice commenting your code looks like. And
Mm.
I did that, and I showed you that, and provided supporting documentation for that, which no one else did, because that's not taught. And that's kind of what you would do kind of in the real world. And so he gave me a C or something like that, and I was just like, threw my hands up. I'm like, you don't get it. And so there was this like major disconnect. But I think that's the germ of something that's a bigger issue, which is
Yeah.
relevance to the real world. And I think that's what I really like about some of your background and what you're doing is you're not only waving your hands and pontificating in a classroom, but you're actually getting real world practical experience. You're keeping your hand on the pulse of what's going on and actually doing this stuff. And I think
Trying. Yeah.
I think that's so important for educators to be doing, to actually test their hypotheses in the classroom in the real world environment, because as you know, things are continuously changing.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a major disconnect, but also being able to ferret out what are going to be the skills after I take this 4-year degree program. What are going to be the skills that I'm going to need to be successful? And some of that requires some future thinking, because
Yeah.
those technologies may be in an incubation state when you first enter the program, but they may be in a much more mature state. Take Java, for example. Java
Yeah.
was a great example where it was nothing. It went from zero to hero in just a couple of years, right? And so I think that that's something that academia needs to really think about, and do the simple exercise. Look at the top most paid technology jobs, or in
Yeah.
whatever field. Look at that list that's published every year and say, do we have a course around that?
Or a degree or a certification or yes. I mean, Mike, what I love about academia, there's this really, really cool um, space. I love theory, and I love some of the leadership development theorists that I read, and it's fascinating how these people are thinking. Now, if you were to put them in a room and ask them to actually develop the 5 people in front of them, they may not be able to do it. There's people in industry who that's all they've ever done, and they really don't know any of the theory behind some of what they're doing, or even the why behind what they're doing, and if what they're doing is correct. So there's this beautiful space of between theory and practice. And of course, the theory, in the textbook, it's beautiful. There's a blue box, there's 4 quadrants, and then all you need to do is add humans,
Right.
and it falls apart, right? But there's a space where both. So this class I teach Tuesday nights, I teach it with the former chief commercial officer, and he brings the practical, hey, Scott, now that's great, and that's what the research says. Here's what my experience was. And I think somewhere in there is more truth than either one kind of alone, right? And so I think academia, if I could, we've moved so far in some circles to kind of this just cognitive head mental processing place that's all we do is train people to think critically, and it's their mind, which I think is very, very important.
Right.
And what are we doing to build some level of skill? And what are we doing to build some level of teaming abilities, creativity, innovation, skills around that space, and the interpersonal dimension of work, and the experience that they're going to need. You just spoke, it's called constructivism, where you make meaning from experience. And because you'd had those experiences working at that incubator, you could now walk into that classroom and have a totally different learning experience than you had the scaffolding. You had some structure by which to hear what this professor was saying in somewhat of a different way. And it sounds like even kind of approach some of the things in a more elegant way. If you can do it in one line of code, that's probably better. I'm just making that assumption. I'm not a coder. And we can also provide mentors and role models who can help guide people's careers. So for me, it's about this balance, this place of balance where, one of the dings on some of the tech elevator type programs might be that, someone doesn't have the theory behind why they're doing what they're doing,
Right.
or they may not have some of that history, right? So there's this balance, and I don't know, it's like a great wine, or I'm not a bourbon guy, but maybe it's a good bourbon. The blend is a little, in my opinion, off kilter. I think we need to provide the theory. What are the skills we also need to prepare people with so that they can hit the ground running, at least in a few areas? If they're in marketing, what are the certifications we can ensure that they've achieved so they can hit the ground running at that organization and knock it out of the park?
Yeah, because the last thing someone wants to do is spend 2 or 4 years uh, in college, and then they get out of college and they figure out, well, now I've got to go and get these certifications to be marketable, right?
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
yeah,
Right. I mean, and again, if the cost has gone up as much as it has, and in many cases, the education hasn't shifted all that much. We still have chalkboards, right? There's still chalk on people's hands after they walk out of the classroom. In some cases, in some contexts, that might be fine. In other contexts, we are ripe for disruption. And as again, Professor Galloway says from NYU, calculus, it's about an $8 billion business. And if you look at calculus as a business, uh, you know, add some artificial intelligence, some other technologies, and we can provide some pretty interesting approaches to calculus that maybe, Mr. Johnson, who's been there for 40 years, never even dreamed of.
right. So I think we can also learn a lot from history on how we got here, because we're here for a reason. We just didn't come up with these decisions overnight. So I guess maybe to talk a little bit about how you think we got here, and what do you think are some of the inhibitors for us to become more innovative? And so in my very novice mind around knowing the problems of higher ed, but as an observer and a and a former user a long time ago, it seems to me that there is an element of uh, culture and maybe tradition, maybe to some degree. Um, Maybe there's some incentive structure challenges to moving us forward, whether it be with the student body incentives, and being lucrative and attractive to students, or even the faculty themselves and how they're incented and what behavior that is driving. And maybe it's the all up economic model of universities. But those are kind of was from an outsider's perspective. That's kind of how I've looked at it. But you're the expert. You tell me. How you think we got here, and what are some of those obstacles that we need to get over.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what I'm about to say is one man's opinion, and it's like I said, in some cases I have more knowledge than in others. It's just in some cases what I'm about to say might be just my lived experience. I don't know that faculty are trained to understand user experience. The students at times can be a thing to be dealt with, not the reason we're there. So if you look at incentive systems at several institutions, it's about the grants you've pulled in, it's about the publications you've written, the journals you've published in, And we'll put up with kind of a lot if you're not that great in the classroom. If you're getting these grants and you're publishing in these four journals, these top journals in the world, that's the game on some level.
Mm.
And so the user experience for the students at times is an afterthought. And I think we need to change that. Because again, we are ripe for disruption because there's a lot of VC money being invested in that $8 billion industry called calculus to disrupt it.
Right.
And that user experience is going to be great. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be wonderful. And even if I'm being taught by an avatar that is at least positive and upbeat and kind of responds quickly, I might have a better experience, right? Than
Yeah.
Mr. Johnson.
Or maybe throw a cheesy joke in every once in a while, you know?
And so, gamify it. Let me compete with people from all over the world and the globe. And all of a sudden, calculus is kind of this different thing. So user experience is a fundamental element. And if I were to say the student is the customer, that would get a lot of backlash in certain circles of academia. That would be heresy, what I just said, that they are the customer. So user experience is an element. Again, this could get me in a lot of trouble in certain circles, but I believe the tenure system, it facilitates in some circles a lot of mediocrity. I got a job for life. I'm in. And so what is the incentive for me now to stay on the cutting edge of my industry, to stay on the cutting edge of my area of research? They're really, I can probably exist for a good amount of time if I'm not on the cutting edge. In fact, I'll go teach my 3 classes or my 2 classes or my 1 class, and, I'll be okay. Now, of course, at other institutions, that's not the case. But when I say other institutions, I mean you have a lot of different types of institutions. You have the Ivy Leagues, you have Research One institutions, you have liberal arts institutions. So by no means is what I'm saying truth. But I do believe that some of the systems and the structure stalls us in some circles. And that stalling, we aren't nimble. For me to get a new degree up and running, it has to meander through the committees and the structures and the people who understand why this is a thing and why it's not a thing. And it's convoluted in certain circles.
So Scott, do you think we've outgrown that model?
I think it's like a lot of other things where I don't know if the model's serving us well in certain dimensions. Tenure, it may be serving us well in certain ways, but I think there's a shadow side to it that doesn't serve us well. There's a shadow side to this journal system. The journal system could be that, to get into some of the top journals, your article is kind of there for a couple years. Well, how do we stay on the cutting edge if we're writing about things and publishing things that are 2 years old?
Right.
But that's the currency. So that's what we have to do. We have to go into that system and write about this really, 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 really narrow thing that only a certain group of people understand. And if I were to pick on the management literature, if you were to pick up an Academy of Management journal, which again is a great academic journal, but if you were to give that to the average CEO, I don't know that they would find relevance. Now, that's not a horrible thing, but I think we have to be mindful of the gap between theory and practice, and we have to stay mindful of that gap. And so I think that can get us in trouble too.
Yeah, I think you're bringing up something really important, and the word that keeps bubbling to the surface for me is really balance, because we've got a similar challenge in the business world where while it may not be completely theoretical, hypothetical, or read like stereo instructions.
Yeah.
But we've got the other issue. We've got publications that are feeding off of more entertainment value, off of buzz and hype.
Yep.
and trying to filter through all the noise of clickbait and just someone trying to sell you something
Yeah.
is incredibly difficult. And so if
Yeah.
we had a balance of real world, real time things that are happening right now, you can pepper in some good entertainment hypeness and buzzworthiness in there, but also balance that with what's coming out of more stable, structured, more of a scientific method
Yep.
around these topics.
Yep.
you know uh, Shoot, I mean, that's a beautiful world there.
Yep.
But how do we get there?
Well, yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with what I'm trying to communicate. I think my personal perception is that in certain places, maybe we're out of balance. In certain institutions, maybe we're out of balance. Certainly, where I think we're out of balance on price to how much the product has changed. I think at times we're out of balance when it comes to focusing. It's real easy for me, Mike, to give you a multiple choice test now to measure that dimension of learning. It takes me a longer time to watch you do the CPR test and fill out a skill sheet for 40 people,
Right.
right? So I think there's some challenges, but we have opportunities to better balance some of the experience. Tenure in certain segments, I think that's wonderful, and there's some great benefits to it. I think there's a shadow side to it as well that may not serve the institutions well, may not serve our end customer well, right?
Now, what I'm thinking of as you're talking, is, and maybe this is a provocative question, Scott. So bear with me, or decline to answer here. But uh, you know, we've already got things like Khan Academy and lots of virtual schooling options. You know, when or if do you think we'll have kind of the first fully digital academic experience where you've got a virtual professor, not a real professor, but a virtual professor that's
Wow.
able to be close to as much as possible to an actual professor that is basing what they're saying off of literature and providing the testing and what have you. And we've got some elements of that today, and I'm sure someone could cobble something together. But do you think that's in our future, that we're going to have either 100%, 80%, 70% of the higher ed be taken over by virtual professors?
Yeah. I have not thought about that, but I love the question. So one element of higher ed, obviously, and one of the most important elements of it is the experience, the 4 or 5 years, the socialization, the camaraderie, the football games, all of that whole dimension of learning. In fact, sometimes that's more important to the students, especially the undergraduates, than the classroom, right? At that stage in their lives for a certain faction of people. They're there because they want to play baseball, and the classroom, sure, that's a thing too, but the baseball and Friday and Saturday night with my friends is really kind of what I thrive on.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly can see a future where certain elements and certain topics could be digitized. There's an interesting TED talk of a professor, I think he was at Georgia Tech, and he developed an automated TA. And the students never met this TA, but this TA was ranked as the best TA because I believe it was a she,
Yeah.
got back to them quickly, answered their questions, and made the learning easy. And so even when you think about working with some of these chatbots some of the time, I mean, I think sometimes that user experience can be better than going through the labyrinth of, whatever company you're trying to call, whatever utility. But I can see a future where some dimensions of it for sure, right? Now, I don't know, as we get to more complex, as we kind of scaffold up to, let's say it's a really complex competency like negotiation, well, that'd be interesting. Leadership, well, kind of messed up to be thinking about could you know a, a digital professor teach that. They definitely could teach that cognitivism piece, that the stuff, the content. Hmm. That's a great question. What do you think? You see that in the future?
I think just like with everything, there's a balance, and it should be, in my mind, situational.
Yeah.
And so if there is, so let's take a hard thing. So you had mentioned building leadership skills.
Yeah.
I could imagine that I could have the fundamental skill courses that teaches me, the mechanics and the terminology and, kind of the punch list stuff. I could see a digital professor doing that for me.
Yeah.
And that would get me up to speed on knowing, okay, so why is it important to have a certain level of inflection in my voice? What's the
Yeah.
importance of gravitas? What's the importance of my hand gestures? What's the importance of how I look and what I'm dressed in?
Yeah.
All those things can be taught without, necessarily high interaction. But that's the
Yeah.
skill part. When
Yep.
we talk about the competency part, very similar to, if as a doctor or a welder or a carpenter, etc., there's a part of your education that is teaching you the skill, but you still have to prove that you can do it. And
Yeah.
I think that part of the whole equation, the residency program, I don't really see in the near future, or maybe the moderate, future, even like 20 years out. I don't really see this unless we
Yeah.
get to the Jetsons world pretty darn quickly. But you know, the interaction, the camaraderie, the coaching that's
Yeah.
needed based on very complicated situations, I don't see a digital advisor or a professor being able to do that. But
Yeah.
the other elements, absolutely, I could see that being supplemented. I could see, hey, I just got a quick question. Can you help me uh, understand this term? I don't
Yeah.
need to ask a person. It may be a complete pain in my rear to go and ask someone that, because I got to deal with, are they available? When can I talk to them?
Yeah.
I got to frame it in a way, all this stuff, when I could just go to a chat bot and go, okay, so what is X? And
Yep.
I just get the answer back.
Yep.
And so,
Or a YouTube video now, right? I mean
yeah.
that there's a YouTube video for everything. How to. Well, so as you're speaking, I'm thinking of Captivation, this automated, digitized system that we've built that is tracking your space fillers. So literally, the idea came to me one day in class as I watch a lot of presentations, Mike, and I was thinking to myself, could I not watch any more presentations? I'm tired of this, right? It's a lot. And I thought, is there something that could accelerate the growth and the development? So I just finished a class this weekend where the students for, 5 times they practiced their talk. It was an executive communication course. They practiced their talk 5 times before the weekend. So things like pace or space fillers, or even key words that they were using. So for instance, are you using words of gratitude? Are you using words that communicate confidence? Can, will, always, never. The system was tracking that and was training in some ways so that when they got to us, the human in the loop piece of all of this, we could then help kind of address some other issues because there isn't computer vision and stuff like that yet. So yes, I think you're exactly right. It's the whole conversation's about balance, but then also I think it's augmenting the learning, right? Especially in the near future. But down the road, I don't know. That's really fascinating
Yeah,
because
and I think you bring up a good point as well, as far as the reinforcement of concepts as well. So you could be in a hall and listen to a professor, or have one-on-ones or whatever it may be. But for me to have, once I learn something, and to have that reinforcement, to be able to go back and refer to a video,
Yeah.
or to have a assessment on what I'm doing right and wrong. Because
Yep.
as you know, and shoot, you teach the course, so I'm not telling you anything new, but presentation skills,
Hmm.
communication. It's not a once and done thing. It's not like you take a course or do a boot camp and you're set for the rest of your life. It's a
No.
muscle.
Yeah.
You constantly have to go back to the well and make sure, okay, have I veered off? Shoot, I
Yep.
haven't done this in a while. Like for me,
Yeah.
I do a lot of stage presentations. I haven't been on stage in a while now. Um, I'm actually a little concerned,
Yeah.
when
No,
I go and
I,
do that,
I have a gig next Thursday, and I have not been in front of people in 6 months, and it's literally almost like a reverse culture shock. Okay, no, you're exactly right. You're exactly right. But think about a future from this is back to leader development, where let's say I have let's say my smart glasses or whatever it is 5 or 6 years from now. I say that I want a performance improvement goal of mine is to be more optimistic. So now my glasses, maybe I have an app where my glasses are listening to how I'm communicating all day. And at the end of the day, I get a score that is in real time coaching me on how I communicated with others throughout the day.
Mhm.
And where the phrases and the keywords and what I was communicating, was it optimistic? Was it positive? Or was I coming off as a little bit of a jerk?
Right.
And so you get into some really cool opportunities for real time training and development in the flow of life, which I think is a really cool place
Oh,
to be in the future.
I love that. I mean, the augmented reality heads up display on my glasses that say, okay, here's your EQ score.
Yeah.
In real time, how much of an asshole are you being right now?
Yes. Yes.
Now, that could be incredibly dangerous, though, for marriages. But outside of that,
This is the billion dollar idea, man. I mean, every aspect of our lives. Like you say something to your children, something pops up. Hey, you know what? Psychologists would suggest that talking to your child at 5 years old that way is not going to lead anywhere good.
right?
Or hey, if you continue to speak with your spouse that way, you will be divorced.
Yeah.
Research suggests.
There is an 80% chance you, my friend, will be sleeping on the couch tonight.
That some of that research exists in some of the marriage and family therapy literature, where I think it's Gottman. I could send you
Yep.
the article, but he did research where he could watch couples communicate, and I think it was within 95% determine whether or not these couples were going to exist.
Oh, yeah.
So yes, you get into some really interesting, my augmented reality as I'm giving the speech and the talk on stage. If I know that I tend to default into space fillers and I've hit 20, maybe I get a little indicator that reminds me in real time that I need to hold off on the space fillers. And that idea came to me at a conference last year where I saw a senior level individual from a large city in the United States say probably 95 to 100 times within the span of a 10-minute little talk, right, in an interview. Wouldn't it have been wonderful if someone would have helped her remind her in real time to augment behavior, right? So I think again, augment. There's some really cool places we could go. And that's why this whole thing of technologies enabling disruption fascinate me, because I'm constantly thinking about that leader development piece. Let's not take people offline. Let's train people in the flow of the day where things are real, right? Because it's real easy for me to sit in a classroom and have you tell me about what great leaders do. As I'm out in the field, in the thick of it, in the weeds, what is my EQ score at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
That's valuable.
And it's super easy to fall into these traps, like we talked about. I mean, this is a muscle. So,
Yeah.
I found myself falling into this trap, as a speaker. Like, for example, hosting a podcast is very different than being a guest on a podcast.
Yeah.
So there are different things running through your mind. So I was finding that I was saying, a whole lot more than I ever have before, because I'm thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead. I'm thinking of future questions. What does this mean?
Yep.
Is this recording okay? And so my mind's distracted. And so,
Multitasking, right? Your cognitive
yeah,
load is heavy.
yeah.
Yeah.
And now I'm using all these filler words and I'm getting mad at myself because as soon as I say it, I know that I've said it. And I'm just like, oh, crap.
I'm
And
experiencing that right now, Mike, as I'm working to make sure I'm looking at the camera because I desperately want to look at you,
yeah,
right? And so I think all of us can develop, improve, and grow. Every one of us in so many different ways. And just to the topic of presentation skills, this medium, although there's many similarities, my voice is just as critical here as it is on a stage or at a podium.
yes.
There's new dimensions here that we have to retrain ourselves to be skilled at, and that's fun. I mean, again, that's a new thing to explore, master, try and get better at, and I think that's cool. I think that's cool.
Now, the only other thing that I would augment about your idea here
Yeah.
is I'm just going to give you this for free. It's
Yes.
yours. I'm not going to chase you down for any sort of IP.
I don't have to give you any percentage for this.
No, no. Well, now that we've got this recorded and memorial here, I'll think about that. But here's what
Okay.
I think you should do. I think you should, as a complimentary product, as an add-on, you should
Yeah.
have a little ankle bracelet that's
Mhm.
hooked to someone's leg or arm or whatever. And every time they say there's a little shock. And then each
You seen that?
additional
You seen
time,
that product? Have you seen that product? It
there
exists.
there's a
Yeah.
product that does that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. 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 There's a product that exists. So, Mike, a previous version of this idea, this platform that we have now, Captivation, it's we had to shift 6 months ago to more of a Zoom online environment. So I spent the summer co-authoring a book on presenting online, but it was going to be, your smart device, your smartwatch, you have an app, and yeah, you could set it at whatever setting you wanted. After 20, you'd get a little haptic buzz. Or if you default into a slow pace and you're monotone for longer than a minute, right?
Right.
Like you get a boring buzz. Like you suck right now. Look at the audience. Everyone's asleep. Switch it up.
Liven it up. We've already went out. We've ordered your espresso. It'll meet you on stage in 1 minute. Let's
Or
pick
the
this thing
person
up.
who just, speaks so fast that you can't keep up with them. And so, again, if you wanted the real time feature, you could get the real time feedback. You didn't have to have that on. You could, just get the data afterwards. And there's apps like that, Speako and Ori, that exist that do some of that right now, especially for practicing. But yeah, it's a fun in the discussion we had yesterday as we were talking about new business models. It's a fun time to be exploring. It just is,
Yeah.
right? And you're at the cutting edge of that, and I love that.
So as we start to wind down a little bit here, I want to we've talked a lot about different things. We've talked about a lot of the challenges, but we haven't talked yet about the really hard part of this, which is fixing it, right? And I don't have the answers. I'll go out on a limb. I don't. You probably don't have all the answers either. But as far as things to think about, things to consider, some recommendations over kind of the three horizons, over between now and the next year or two, the second horizon, 2 to 5 years, and maybe much longer term, 5+ years out, because you go anything past that 5 year, 5 to 10 year horizon, then you get into what I lovingly refer to as rainbows and unicorn land, because who the hell knows what's going to happen at that point. But I guess for you, knowing some of the constraints, some of the challenges, some of the legacy baggage, what would be some of the advice that you would give other professors, other folks that are entering into academia or academia-like things? What sort of recommendations would you give them to modernize and introduce much more innovation into the higher ed sphere?
Yeah. Well, I think we have to pay attention to the margins, and the margins, quote unquote, and I don't say that in a belittling way in any way, shape, or form, but I'll go back to Tech Elevator. They had 700 graduates last year. John Carroll University welcomed about 700 students on campus. That's interesting. That's interesting. There's data there. There's perspective that we have to be exploring and we have to be aware of. And what is going on with LinkedIn Learning? What is happening with some of these other platforms that are popping up and other business models? There's companies that you can hire right now that will run certifications for you, run boot camps for you, online, professional, put up your logo, and people think they're getting a John Carroll class or a Baldwin Wallace class or a Middlebury class, and maybe it's not, right?
Right.
So there's a lot of opportunity, and what's happening out there on some of those margins and what's gaining traction. And I think there's going to be, and paying very, very close attention to some of that is one piece of all of this, that having that growth mindset and really paying close attention to what's starting to get legs, because there's universities who will come out of this very, very successful because they've latched onto an approach or differentiated themselves in some way that just helps them really, really shine. So that's one consideration. I think what's happening on the margins, and are we paying attention, and what's gaining traction within our institutions. I think it's about getting to the decision makers and asking to run the experiment. So, you're not going for the whole shebang. You're saying, can we run this experiment? Can we try this? And I think when you're navigating adaptive challenges, some people call them wicked problems. Some people call them ill-structured problems. But problems where there isn't a clear answer, clear path forward, oftentimes you have to think about that as, okay, we're learning and we need to experiment, and we need to experiment quickly and fail and learn and repeat. So going to some of those decision makers and saying, can we run this experiment and see if this can get legs and see if we can gain traction? And I think that's an opportunity. Sometimes trying to go up the traditional chain, introduce traditional programming, it gets bogged down, it gets lost, and it's a slog. So how do we communicate in a way with our decision makers? Because they're struggling too. They don't have the answers.
Right.
They're looking for solutions. They're looking for the thing that is going to get more butts and seats, that is going to help the bottom line, that is going to improve the user experience, that is going to make that institution shine. So that's how I think about it. And if you can build a little bit of a coalition of 3 or 4 individuals who want to run that experiment with you, you have a better shot. So those are a couple things that come to mind for me. I know that doesn't solve it, but
no, I think it definitely chips away at some of those root foundational things that will help us kind of in the longer term address this in a more material way. Because as you said, I mean, we don't have the answers. This is in a lot of ways a new way of thinking about higher education, because we're still very much locked into, a multiple centuries ago model, right?
Yeah. Yep. And what are those new business models and those new opportunities that, we discussed yesterday on my podcast that could fundamentally transform the industry, fundamentally transform the user experience, fundamentally help people learn more quickly, right? And make it a lifelong process. That's we didn't get there, and we won't get there probably, but that whole notion of experiential learning and getting close to where the work is being done. And then also, and by that I mean like medical school, medical students, they're working in a healthcare organization. They're close to the learning, right? Mm-hmm. And some co-op programs at like the University of Cincinnati, where architecture, you're close to the learning. That's a wonderful opportunity. But then this lifelong learning space, what does that look like for an institution? How could that be a differentiator? If I said to you, if you go to college here, you can take classes here for the rest of your life. What
Right.
does that do? What does that do? What does that look like? Especially if it's online. Now all of a sudden, huh? And I would love to get into a space where those types of ideas are being discussed.
No, I think you're onto something there. I think, once you're past, a certain point in your education and you're able to say, okay, now I can have it as a service and it's
Yeah.
modularized and I can, on demand and based on where I'm at in my career and my aspirations in my career, I can get into some very specialized things. I think that'd be
Think about that.
phenomenal.
Think about that. I mean, again, like so if I go to XYZ institution for 4 years of undergrad, and it could be, yeah, education as a service, or it could be, I don't know. But think about the relationships you would build, lifelong relationships with alumni. Again, you would literally be with them every step of the way of their career. You're teaching them Alteryx, and they're getting the promotion because they know it now. Wow. Think about the giving potential, the commitment of those alumni to the institution, the mentoring opportunities that would occur. I don't know. Right now, so many alums just go away. They're done.
Right.
You don't keep them close. So it's cool stuff. Let's
And,
do that.
and so you get the standard
Let's
letter
do that.
saying, donate back.
Yeah. Congratulations. Now the only time you'll be hearing from us is
So, we talked about a lot of different things. We went into a lot of different nooks and crannies around this particular topic. I guess for folks that are listening, would be good to hear from you is there a single takeaway that you would want to leave people with as they kind of take in all this knowledge that they're getting from us? What would be that one takeaway?
that one takeaway.
I know I put you on the spot and I only gave you one, so it really kind of put you on the spot.
It makes it really big. This
Yeah.
one pearl of wisdom,
You
right?
better get it all in.
Yeah, I better get it all in. The pressure. Can you see the sweat pouring? I think for the people listening, uh, vote with your feet. What is the consumer demand? I think at times some of the expectations for education can be kind of low. Again, I go back to kind of, the person pulling out the overhead projector, and they put up with that.
Right.
What is that model that creates that incredible user experience, that incredible collegiate experience where relationships are built and that personal growth occurs? That's a hybrid, it's digitized, it's personalized, it's lifelong, it's experiential. I think it's ripe. I think there's so many opportunities to create. I really do.
Now they're not still using. I forget what they even call them. Where you had the overhead projectors and they had the transparent sheets that you put on it that you draw on. That doesn't still happen, right?
There's a few roaming around.
Oh no.
There's a few roaming around. That and the dot camera, and yeah, yeah, the board, chalkboard.
Wow.
And again, in some situations, the chalkboard makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, I don't have a chalkboard in my office, but I do have an entire wall that I'm looking at behind the camera that I went to Home Depot and I
yeah,
bought some whiteboard paint, and there is literally an entire wall that is a whiteboard,
yeah.
and I
You
love
know
it.
what? That's whiteboard paint didn't exist 40 years ago, 60 years ago,
Right.
70 years ago. So you're at least, you're inching towards the future there.
So, so Scott, it's been phenomenal talking to you. It's been super interesting. I've learned quite a bit here. Hopefully, others are taking some really good pearls of wisdom from you as well. For those that may want to harass you about, essentially abolishing the tenure model,
Yeah.
or folks that are just genuinely curious about your thoughts or want to
Is that what you're
engage.
going to name the podcast? Abolish the tenure model? Is that Scott?
I'm thinking of a very clickbaity, controversial title here, and I think we might be zeroing in on Scott Allen of
Yeah.
will abolish all
Yeah.
that you know and love about your job as a professor.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that's probably what we go with. What do you think?
I'll just say thank you. I
Yeah.
just say thank you.
So if people want to get a hold of you, how can they get a hold of you?
So scottjallen.net is the website, and SJ or at SJA Tweets is Twitter, and Phronesis, Practical Wisdom for Leaders, is the name of my podcast, and I explore any number of different kind of dimensions of the whole conversation around leadership. So, yeah, those are a few ways.
That's awesome, and I love your podcast. You're doing great stuff. You got great guests. Your last one probably isn't the greatest, but you had a good run up until that point. But
I'm going
keep
to
up.
release it this weekend. I think our conversation yesterday is the next one I'm going to release, Mike.
Nice,
So that's good
nice.
stuff. Yeah.
Well, very good. Well, listen, I'm not going to take up any more of your time because we went over the time that I said we were going to lot together. So I want to be respectful of your time, but I am grateful that you decided to join us here today.
Cool. Thank you, sir.
Thank
Be
you so
well.
much.
Thanks for all you do.